He was kicked out of an elite club simply because his skin color wasn't the right one. The crowd indifferently watched as Dennis was humiliated in front of everyone, but they had no idea that the next morning, this man would become their new owner. It was as if the system of hatred and injustice had handed him the ultimate weapon for the most powerful revenge. What he did next would shock even those who thought they'd seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Denny, a successful entrepreneur, was known for his sense of style and confidence. That evening was supposed to be a well-deserved break after a stressful week. He arrived at the doors of the most famous and expensive club in the city, where his business partners and acquaintances were waiting for him. Dressed in a perfect suit and carrying his pass for the private event, he approached the entrance, where he was met by a tall security guard with impeccable posture. "Sorry, but you don't belong here," the guard said coldly, blocking his path. His tone left no doubt. This man was hostile. Dennis paused, his face calm, but confusion was building inside. He pulled out his pass, personalized with his name, and calmly extended it to the guard. "I'm invited," Dennis said confidently, pointing to the official document. The guard, without even glancing at the pass, squinted and smirked with contempt, as if he had encountered this situation many times before. "Even if you were a king, you still wouldn't get in." The guard stepped closer, his voice sounding threatening. "Leave, or I'll call the police." Dennis froze. Inside, a storm was brewing. How dare this man speak to him like that? This wasn't just a refusal. It was a public humiliation in front of dozens of people gathered around. Passers-by stopped to take quick glances, but no one intervened. Some of the club's guests, already past the entrance, stood a little way off, watching the scene. Dennis felt his fists clenching. But he knew that causing a scene here and now would be a mistake. Memories of previous experiences when the color of his skin became an obstacle to his success surfaced in his mind. He had encountered prejudice so often that he learned not to show how deeply it wounded him. Without saying another word, he slowly turned around, feeling the judgmental and contemptuous gazes of the crowd. Each step echoed in his mind, amplifying the humiliation. He walked towards his car, but inside, a plan for revenge was already brewing. He knew one thing. That night would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed that scene. Dennis couldn't rest that night. The guard's words played over and over in his head. "Even if you were a king, you still wouldn't get in." That moment burned his pride, and not just as a personal insult. It was a stark reminder of the discrimination he had faced his entire life. But this time, he wasn't going to let it go. This club would be his, and he would prove that race should never be a barrier for anyone. In the morning, without wasting time, Denny called his financial advisor, who knew that when Denny set his mind on something, it was practically a done deal. "Get the paperwork ready." His voice was cold and focused. "I'm buying this club. We need lawyers and appraisers. I don't care about the price. The deal needs to be closed as soon as possible." The entire day, Denis didn't stop for a moment. He met with lawyers, financiers, and real estate specialists. Everyone knew that Denis was not someone to be trifled with. He was decisive and relentless when it came to his reputation and principles. The deal, which could have taken months, was accelerated thanks to his influence and connections. Documents were prepared, contracts reviewed, and the lawyers readied themselves for the signing. Meanwhile, Denis couldn't shake the humiliation he had experienced. Every time he recalled the guard's cold look, his resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just about buying a property anymore. It had become a personal battle against injustice, a fight with the system that had tried to put him down. By the evening, his team had everything prepared. The lawyers confirmed that the deal was in its final stages, and the next day, he could officially become the club's owner. But Dennis wasn't planning to simply show up with the papers. He wanted to make a statement, loud and clear, so that everyone knew who the new owner was. His reputation as a man who doesn't accept defeat was at stake. He would make sure that no one would ever dare to kick him out again. Not here, not anywhere else. The next evening, Denny approached the club with a different mindset. His steps were confident, and his gaze was cold and focused. In a luxurious suit with perfectly pressed cuffs and gleaming gold cufflinks, He walked knowing that this night would change everything. This time, it wasn't just a visit. He came to claim what was his. The city lights glowed behind him, but his thoughts were fixed on one thing: victory. The security guard, the same one who had humiliated Denis the night before, instantly recognized him. The guard's face contorted with confusion and perhaps a hint of panic. He began to slowly move forward, preparing to stop Denis just like the last time. But Denis made a simple gesture. He raised his hand, signaling that any attempts to stop him were pointless. "I'm not here to cause you trouble," he said calmly, but with such authority that the guard froze for a moment. "I'm here to inform you that this club now belongs to me." Dennis slowly pulled out the papers from the inside pocket of his suit and handed them to the guard. It was the contract for the purchase of the club, signed just a few hours earlier. The guard turned pale, his face blotching as he looked at the documents. His hands trembled, and he didn't know what to say. The crowd outside began to murmur, watching the scene in disbelief. They hadn't fully understood what had happened, but they sensed that something had shifted. The atmosphere was changing. "Step aside," Dennis added coldly, his voice full of confidence. The guard didn't dare to object. He stepped back, and Denis calmly walked past. Inside the club, the atmosphere was entirely different. Music was playing, people were laughing, unaware of what had just changed outside. Denis slowly scanned the room, determination in his eyes. He was no longer just a guest. He was the owner. And not only in the literal sense, he had taken control of the entire situation. While the people continued to party, Denis knew that their world had just been turned upside down. Those who had considered themselves the elite and looked down on him would soon realize who really owned the place. Denis walked confidently through the club, every step filled with dignity. He saw people turning to look at him, whispering among themselves, unsure of what had just happened. The very faces that had looked at him with disdain or indifference yesterday were now filled with curiosity and confusion. Every step Denis took was a signal. "I'm back, and I own this place." Slowly but surely, he headed towards the VIP section, where yesterday's regulars of the club could watch the events unfold. Among them were those who had witnessed his humiliation and hadn't even thought to intervene. Now, they quietly observed him, some seemingly realizing that their arrogance was no longer acceptable. Denis motioned to the club manager, who immediately came forward with a bow. Everyone noticed the moment when the club's manager, known for his arrogance and self-assurance, bowed to the new owner. It was a clear sign. The rules had changed. That evening, Denis held a press conference right in the center of the club. Against the backdrop of glittering lights and velvet chairs, he stood in front of the microphone, surrounded by journalists and local celebrities. Everyone was waiting for his statement, knowing that something important was about to be announced. "This club," Denis began, his voice strong and loud, "will no longer be a place for discrimination. I'm turning it into a space where every person, regardless of skin color or background, can feel free and comfortable. There will be no more room for prejudice here. In this club, everyone will be respected." The crowd erupted in applause. People who might have dismissed his words the day before now realized that this wasn't just revenge. It was a new beginning. Denis felt the atmosphere around him change. His words hadn't just made an impression. They laid the foundation for transformation. After the press conference, he met with the club's management, where he unhesitatingly fired the security guard who had humiliated him the night before. That man had been the face of discrimination, and now he was expelled. No discussions, no excuses. His time had come. The club entered a new era under Denis's leadership. People talked about how he had changed the status quo in just a few hours. He proved that even the lowest acts of racism couldn't break someone who chooses to fight back and wins.